And we're recording here on the porch with a fresh cup of coffee in the Horse Commander mug. Wanted to make this video as a bit of a documentation. Obviously, my YouTube the past couple of weeks has been giving a lot of pep talks that I think have been pretty high quality, especially the last two, and addressing very important concepts. And I've got some more written out for the coming weeks, but I wanted to, I guess, take a break with the planned programming to, I guess, discuss a bit of what's been on my mind, because right now the world is, I'd say there's a lot of conflict in the world, not just like physical conflict, but conflict in terms of ideas. And I feel like a lot of the dialogue that we see online and even in person is quite violent. And what do I mean by that? It's that people have very strong, very vocalized, they impose their ideas quite strongly. And there's nothing wrong with that per se, but I think because in every kind of sector or realm of discussion that you look at, there's a big gap. Like, people are no longer on the same page. So when people say something or give an idea to the other person, even though the person communicating it might have been very well intended, it can come off as an attack, it can come off as radical, it can come off as extremist. And I guess the more that I, spend time in this space and spend time giving my thoughts and learning and teaching and trying to guide, I guess I've seen this come up a bit more. So like an example from yesterday or the day before was in my Nick Fuentes reel, when I was talking about how one of the reasons I support him, or one of the things that I support about him, is the fact that he is anti-gaming. And then people will come at you and say, it's like, well, it's okay to have gaming as a hobby provided you're lifting weights and XYZ. And like, I don't know, the second that you say that someone shouldn't do something or someone should do something, people who aren't doing those things or people who are against you will instantly sort of retaliate or react. And there's nothing wrong with that. We're in the marketplace of ideas. I guess personally where I found the challenge is that I was listening to this podcast with Luke Belmar, who's a beast. I might link the pod below because I found it really insightful, but the inputs that I'm feeding into myself are very different from what other people put in. And as a result of my inputs being different, my outputs and conclusions, you could say, tend to be rare in the true sense of the word. Like, there's not many people, I guess, speaking or talking in the way that I do. So what would I say are my inputs? Well, for example, I'm part of a social media training program where on average these guys are making upwards of 10, 20, 30, 50, 100K a month from their personal brands or their businesses. There's some coaches in there, there's like music producers, you name it, they're probably in that community. But that's an example of a community or a group of people that I'm a part of, which I spend a lot of time in because obviously I'm trying to grow this at the moment, that their baselines and their way of thinking and speaking, if I talk to someone down the road who's just working a 9 to 5 or whatever, or even if they've started like a service-based physical business, it's kind of different. I mean, although starting a business is much more closer, I guess, to what I'm doing now than like working a 9 to 5, but that's an example of where the way of life that these guys live, and I guess the amount of money that they're making or want to be making, is already different from, I guess, what most people are happy to accept in their day-to-day. What are my other inputs? Well, I listen to people like Jocko Willink, like Sean Ryan, like David Goggins, who are ex-military, do a lot of physical training, and from a purely secular perspective, although I believe all of them are Christian to some degree based on what they've said, especially Sean Ryan, these men live and die and give their lives and have written books and, built companies and podcasts and everything in order to serve other people better. And, these guys you wouldn't look at them and say they're geniuses or they're above ordinary intelligence. Like, they're just regular, hardworking men who have taken an idea or have taken a talent they have or an ability to communicate it and used it in the service of the greater good. And they've changed heaps of lives, probably millions of lives between them. For Jocko and David Goggins, and probably other people who I can't think of right now, waking up at 4 in the morning to go to the gym is not a particularly virtuous or rare thing to do. It's a basic expectation that if you live a busy life as a man, if you're trying to provide for your family and you're trying to start a business, well, of course you're not going to skip the gym. So if you going to the gym and fitting it into your routine means doing it at 4 or 5 in the morning, then so be it. Like, of course we're going to go to the gym at 4 a.m. Like, what's the alternative? Skipping the gym, being weak in our bodies, and spending all our time, building a business or being on the computer? Like, that's not an option. I'm sure there are other examples. I mean, there's also people that I read, I read the Stoics, I read scripture who, St. Paul says, I can't be disqualified. I'm running this race like an athlete. I'm training myself in discipline. Like, very broadly, all of the inputs that I'm putting into my head are pushing me to be better. Like, nothing that I read leads me to think you're in an okay spot or you've done enough and it's time to rest. Again, as I said in my previous video, I'm not disqualifying the need for true leisure or intentional rest. That's a commandment, but all in all, I'd say the baseline and the type of people who I compare myself to are a lot stronger, are a lot more wealthy, are probably even more disciplined, and have had a much bigger impact than what I am now. And that's not a negative thing. To me, that's a huge motivation. To me, that's a huge pull. To me, that's the example that I look at. I don't look at my friends or my immediate circle or, taking the average from the 10 people around me. It doesn't matter. Like, I'm looking at, the most successful and the people that are making the biggest impact in the world, and I'm looking at the saints as my measure of who I should be as a man. I look at what St. Francis de Sales says. I look at what these great men of history have done and have achieved. And that kind of gives me the archetype, if you will. Obviously, Jesus Christ is above all of those, but I guess the saints and perhaps some of these other figures on a different level, they exist as people who are living in imitation of some of Christ's virtues and attributes. But that's kind of besides the point. I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that, when I live my daily life, when I live my 7 days a week and I'm reading my books and I'm studying and I'm talking to these people within Launch Socials and pushing myself to be better and to grow the brand and everything like that, the inputs, I would say, push me to perform very highly. And I don't give myself an option. I don't give myself excuses. As I said, I don't change the ball game and suddenly compare myself to the guy who lives down the road. I very clearly know who I want to be, who I feel God is calling me to be, what I think God is calling me to achieve, and I'm pursuing that very unifocally. So when I talk about life, when I talk about work, when I talk about business, when I talk about training, it's coming from those inputs. Like, it's coming from, I guess, a diet of ideas that I'm feeding myself and programming myself with. Now, when you take those inputs and you take me as a person, I would say that I've made a lot of growth in discipline and virtue over the past few years. my outputs are going to reflect that. What it takes to become people like the ones that have influenced me, or what it took for me to become the man that I am now, was quite a drastic type of life compared to what people ordinarily live. So for example, when I critique alcohol and video games, it comes from the perspective that, number one, none of the people I look up to drink or play video games. But number two, for myself, looking at my life, when I used to play video games, it was something that was holding me back. It was a distraction, it was a futile amusement. I was chasing dopamine on these retarded platforms and getting stars and levels. It was a completely non-productive habit. I don't believe, maybe sometimes, but I believe most of the time it wasn't intentional leisure, not as compared to spending time with mates or reading a book or whatever. I go into this more in my previous video. But as I said, based on my current perspectives and where I stand today, video games is not an option. It's not something I can do or will do because it's completely counterproductive. It does not, the man who I'm trying to become does not play video games. The man who I'm trying to become does not go to the pub on Friday or Saturday, does not drink regularly, if he drinks at all. Again, because it's a distraction, it numbs the senses, it dulls the mind, it impacts recovery. We know that scientifically for everyone in general, but even for me personally, like my resting heart rate goes up. It takes me way longer to get to sleep, even if I'm tired. Alcohol just does not fit in my life. Now, when I say that, which for me is a very rational and I would say objective conclusion that can and should be applied to other people, especially men who are pushing themselves to be better. When I say those things, to someone who is not living a life where they're pushing themselves, for someone who is not controlling their inputs at all, they're scrolling, they're hanging out with, regular old Joes, they're going to the pub, they're working 9 to 5. They're just living a regular life, and most regular people are unhappy. They're not satisfied with who they are. They're not making the money they want. They're not pursuing a relationship with God. They're not controlling their inputs. They're just receiving what the world is giving them. And what the world is giving them is bullshit. It's not positive. It's not healthy. It's not conducive to flourishing. Do you take that kind of person, even if they're a believing Christian or Catholic, and they see me, who's calling out all of these, what I would say, bad habits that people have, who's telling people to push harder, who's telling men that as a man, you have an obligation to be physically strong and capable, that this isn't just an optional thing for farmers or tradies who work a physical job, that as a man, it's a direct responsibility and obligation. It's a duty for you to be physically capable. People get challenged by that. And I can't really help it. I guess what I can help, and I guess it's an interesting phenomenon to study with figures like Nick Fuentes and Andrew Tate, is like, these guys are saying things that I would broadly consider to be right. Sure, you can take like the anti-Semitism, the misogyny, or the stuff he says about women. Like, obviously I don't agree with everything around that specifically, but broadly speaking, if you look at what Andrew Tate says about discipline, if you look at Nick Fuentes' critiques of society and like these freaking incel guys, these internet guys, they're broadly right. But why is there such a huge negative reaction to them? Is because the way they communicate is inflammatory, it's provocatory, it's exaggerated to provoke the biggest reaction possible. So it's perfectly natural that people are going to look at these guys and say they're off the rails, they're absolute spastics. And I guess the point that I'm coming to now is, as I'm producing a lot of content and posting daily reels and doing these YouTube videos, how do I communicate those ideas which I hold to be unequivocally true? something like alcohol, something like video games, something like what I think the lives that men should be living, the call to holiness, the call to virtue. How do I communicate that in a way that isn't inflammatory, that isn't provocatory, that isn't a hard imposition of my beliefs upon others? How do I frame it in a way that is suggestive, that is encouraging, that makes you want to do what I'm doing, that makes you want to emulate me, or that makes you want to emulate the habits that I'm putting forth? And that's a hard question to ask, or that's a hard thing to do, I guess. I think I'm quite a harsh, argumentative person by nature. Like I look at things very black and white. So does my dad. And you know, I could be stereotyped as one of these like conservative guys, like my way or the highway, kind of like this is how it is. And you know, that is what I think. Like I'm not going to change the way I think, but there's a great importance in being able to communicate that in a charitable way where you're actually not being counterproductive. Because, you know, if I come out all guns blazing on every single reel or every single video, there'll be people that do receive the message and do make changes from that. But there'll also be people who might be at different stages on their journey, or who perhaps are of a different emotional, psychological makeup as me, who when they hear me say these things in a harsh way are going to be turned off by it, and they're going to be like, here's just another psycho wanting to control my life, or I don't know what their reaction would be, but whatever it is, it's not a positive one. So yeah, I guess it's a big thing on my mind at the moment. I feel that overall I'm doing a good job, and I can see that by the growth. You know, more people are following me, more people are watching my videos. Like the past 2 YouTube videos got like 300 and 200 views, which is really good for just me talking. You know, they're not edited or anything. But at the same time, when I think about, you know, certain people or certain types of people or people in real life, you know, connections that I have in the real world, you know, what would they think if they heard me say this, or what would they think if they watched this video? And I really want to be careful about 2 things. Firstly, I don't want to compromise on my message at all, because I know, based on what people have told me and testimonials and the fact that a lot of these things that I'm saying have worked in my life, you know, I know these things to be true. But I also want to be careful is that I'm not burning people off unnecessarily, or harming connections and potential relationships that would be greatly beneficial to my growth and the growth of Fit for the Kingdom. I don't want to burn those bridges for the sake of clicks, or for the sake of, you know, saying this one thing and I get real riled up, or I want to really make a point. There's a time and place for that, but again, I think there's a real virtue in finding the mean between those extremes, because you don't want to get to the point of Nick Fuentes or Andrew Tate where it's like 50-50 love or hate, but you also don't want to be this guy that's just people pleasing or always trying to tiptoe around the difficult issues, because I don't think that's effective either. You have to be able to call people out, and you have to be able to do it with love and charity in order that they go on to make a positive change in their life. But yeah, that's kind of the wrestle that I've been thinking about mostly yesterday when I was writing a few things. I think it's a good thing to think about for sure. I feel I don't have many people to talk about it, just because, you know, there's not a lot of people doing what I'm doing, I guess. You know, I talked to my brother a bit and dad, and you have this problem come up in just normal relationships, you know, between people, in terms of maybe they're not doing something right, or, you know, that they could be doing better. And then how do you, as their friend or their mentor or their parent, address it? Because it's something that needs to be addressed. But, you know, if you just say the first thing that comes to mind, you know, you can greatly screw up a relationship or whatever. So Yeah, I think that's pretty much most of what I had. I'm definitely going to be considering and thinking about this more, talking about it with a few more people in terms of finding the mean as I go forwards. I think it's also something that will come naturally with time, you know, as you do just produce more content and talk more and give more talks and stuff and get feedback from different people. It's definitely not like you just have the solution or have the answer, but I guess it's just walking that line carefully. So yeah, hopefully you got something out of that. Again, as I said at the start, this is more so of a documentation as opposed to a pep talk. But yeah, definitely something to consider and think about more. Let me know if you have any feedback or advice in the comments on how to keep moving forwards, following our Lord. And yeah, God bless you all. Thanks for watching.